Welcome to Building While Flying, a Sasha Group podcast where we interview business leaders about how they tackle challenges, stay resilient, and navigate ever-changing skies.
Jared, thanks so much for joining us on Building While Flying.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Jared is the founder of Offsite, which is a company that plans retreats that can save you time, money, and stress. Jared is also a TED speaker and recognized as USA Today's most connected millennial. Jared has written 3 books, and his insights on entrepreneurship, networking, remote work, and offsites have been featured in major media such as Forbes, Times, Harvard Business Review, Fortune, NPR, Fox Business, and more. So, Jared, I want to start off by just asking about kind of the origin story of Offsite. You founded the company in January 2021. That was almost a year into the pandemic. So I'm curious if you think back to that time, was launching Offsite a reaction to the pandemic, kind of accelerating the normalization of remote and hybrid teams, or was an offsite planning company always in your mind and it just kind of coincided that that's when you got into it?
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me. It's a mix of both. And so I like to say that it's 10 years of my life's work before the pandemic mixed with some shower thoughts I had during the pandemic about the future of work. And so when I was a teenager, I started my first business at 15. We don't have to talk about that. That didn't go anywhere. But 16, I started working for a company called 15Five, which are one of the leaders in employee engagement and performance management software today. Maybe like 250 employees, like close to $1 billion valuation. I was fortunate to be one of the first 10 employees there, just off a cold email that I sent to the founder. Read about him in Forbes. He was called the most connected man you don't know in Silicon Valley. And he hadn't even launched the company publicly. And so I was just trying to work with him, started working with him off a cold email, like offered to work on paid in exchange for his mentorship, and found myself at a remote first company 12 years ago that planned offsites for the team. So we got together in person, and they were a company that helped other companies with things like employee engagement, retention, and alignment. And so got that experience. When I left, I took a 7-year speaker, author, consultant turn to my career, ended up working with New York Times bestselling authors as a marketing consultant like Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote the book Alone and startups and whatnot. Then I wrote some books. The books turned into speaking. The speaking turned into facilitating. And so now I was going to offsites and conferences as a keynote speaker and then as a facilitator for like executive teams in the Fortune 1000. Wanted to learn how to market to millennials and like all that fun stuff. You know, the young person card I was able to play. And yeah, so then right before the pandemic, I had a company called Meeting of the Minds, which is like Gary Vaynerchuk's 4Ds experience, sort of a mastermind event, gather entrepreneurs once every 3 months. And I found myself basically doing what we do for clients now at Offsite, where I was finding venues that were inspiring and marketable, to my clients. But, for Offsite, they want to market it to their employees, get them excited about it. I was negotiating discounts with the hotels. I was managing some travel for myself and my team. I was planning an agenda hour by hour. I was facilitating. I was connecting with attendees months before, months afterwards. And so during the pandemic, all these sort of experiences came together, and I recognized the trend of remote and hybrid work, where 12 years ago, less than 10% of companies were remote or hybrid. Yep. The pandemic, maybe it was 20%. And then it became 80% of companies that were remote or hybrid after the pandemic. At least that was my bet. And so decided like a company like Offsite should exist because every company's going remote. They're all going to plan offsites. Those offsites are going to become really important. There's never been a company out there that's like the one-stop shop for all things offsites and team retreats. So why not build it?
Got it. Yeah. So I love the fact that you were building something that was useful to yourself with the prior company, and then that became kind of the offering, right? I always love talking with founders, and it's almost like, what would you have taught yourself 5 years ago with all the knowledge you have now, and then built a service or a company kind of around that knowledge you've gained around that? So could you maybe dive in a little bit to what the business model looks like? Is it a flat fee for services? Is it a percentage of a total budget? Like, what is that ultimately like? How did you, I guess, arrive at what that was going to look like?
Yeah, so it's a flat fee. We charge $250 per person per offsite, and scale that up or scale it down if you have a lot of it. Right. And then we do end-to-end offsite planning. So we help you with your venue, with your travel, on the ground travel support, planning the agenda hour by hour, helping you find all your non-meeting space vendors like photographers, videographers, speakers, facilitators, activity providers. So yeah, pretty simple. And we decided to do that as opposed to taking a percentage of total spend because we wanted wanted to be on our client's side in all these negotiations, as opposed to trying to like artificially increase the spend. And so where the saving time, money, and stress comes into play. We got to save money and pay for ourselves. Otherwise, no one's going to hire us.
Well, you kind of just described of that, the curated experience that you're bringing to clients. Was that something that was always at the heart of the business, or was that something that you kind of realized you needed to formalize that while you were building the company?
Long term, we're sort of building Airbnb, a curated marketplace of venues and other vendors with a platform like Rippling or Canva that gives you everything you would need to plan without us. So I think the business model is going to evolve over time to more of a SaaS or like subscription model. But we started as 100% service and then moved to sort of tech-enabled service. And then now we're building software. And that has its own challenges, but there are a lot of benefits to doing that move because you're learning like what to productize in building software. And then you're learning the business model over time as you're talking to clients and figuring out what's valuable to them. And so it became pretty clear from a software standpoint that the biggest pain point was finding venues for the offsite. Nothing happens unless you find your hotel, your meeting space. Like you can't book flights, you can't find your photographers, videographers, unless they're willing to travel, but it's cheaper to find them local. You can't plan activities. Like you have to find where you're having it first. And without offsite, for example, or a marketplace like Offsite, you might be emailing like info at some random hotel. You're going to start Googling and like find hotels that have great wedding experiences or good like personal experiences, but the rating systems aren't built for offsites and like business group travel. Even like the Expedias of the world aren't built for groups of larger than 8 people, for example. And so we decided to just build the marketplace side of what we're doing first. And we've, recently, we're recording this in like early April 2023, listening like 2 or 3 years from now, but we've been prioritizing all things marketplace. And so now we have over 200 hotels. So we've signed the master service agreements and pre-negotiated discounts and favorable treatment and all that. And then we built out like the marketplace for speakers and facilitators, kind of like our own speakers bureau, I guess. And then we have, a partnership with Swag Up to do your swag. We have a partnership with a company called Offsite to book flights, and just thinking like all the different vendors that you might need while we're still doing the agenda creation, the budgeting, service, all that as a service. And so we'll eventually come back around to building the rest of the platform. But I guess the lesson here is the service and starting without expensive software engineering and all that like taught us what to build, and hopefully that'll save us time in sort of getting to market with our sort of grand vision product.
You brought up a point I wanted to touch on today at some point, which is this kind of the rise of tech-enabled service and looking at industries that historically have been localized or relationship-based or, old school yellow pages, just like Googling what's the least expensive kind of option. I'm thinking of like moving and things like that. Like there's been a couple different, companies that have come along that have built that kind of layer of tech-enabled service. And so what advantages has that given you to kind of bring that mindset to the event planning, but then even within event planning niche kind of category of company corporate offsite?
Yeah, there's a lot of like startup axioms and like isms that are worth listening to. Maybe over drinks one day I'll tell you all the things I didn't listen to and like wish
I want to hear about those too. Yeah.
But sort of the doing things that don't scale idea or finding the fastest way to make money to prove out a concept. I think that is one thing we did right. And I try and continue to do with the team in terms of launching like new pricing options or things like that. And so the name of the game at the very beginning of Offsite was to see if we could get someone to pay us to plan an offsite. And we could have built a website, we could have built technology, could have done all these things, but the real answer is like, will someone pay us? And so back when it was just me and co-founder at the time, we just pitched a couple people, they gave us money, and we started planning an offsite. Like we didn't have a website, we had nothing to show other than just like the 2-page contract of like, hey, we're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. And I was leveraging my network, I was leveraging I guess past planning experience with Meeting of the Minds and things like that, but we were just trying to prove if someone could pay us for that. And so I would 100% recommend recommend that with any type of business, even if it's a complicated software that you're envisioning, like what's the simplest version of delivering that? And then what's the fastest and simplest way to get someone to pay you for it, or even do a deposit or something like that? Because it's one thing for someone to say they want what you're offering. It's another thing for them to vote with their
money down
or euros. And so I think we did that right. Our industry is SaaS, which is software as a service, but it makes sense to start with the service and then turn it into software. And there's pros and cons to that. But I think it allowed us to get to market faster with initial clients, get some case studies out of that for marketing purposes. And then, as we talked about earlier, like learn what software to build and hopefully save some time and money there.
And so I imagine in those early conversations, some of that was around getting people to think of investing in offsites as a nice to have to a must have. And some of that might have just been the acceleration of remote hybrid working that is made the need to kind of get together part of your business operations. But I imagine still most people think of that as, well, how can I do that in the least cost? Or maybe people think that like, oh, my business is too small to invest in an offsite. What messages did you use to overcome those hurdles? How did you kind of break down some of those barriers as they were coming up?
Yeah, I think another thing we did well is we chose the right type of client to target. And this is something I saw 15Five do really well. They, whether purposely or by happenstance, they chose to work with a certain stage, like startup, for example, that was high growth, or just a small business, doesn't have to be startups. They worked with companies that were 10 to 20 people now, but could be 200, 1,000 people in the future. And so we have done the same thing where, our initial clients were 20, 30 person companies, but like our first ever client raised a Series A and like double their headcount, and suddenly one offsite became a whole year's worth of offsites. We were able to help them build the cadence of offsites and actually teach them how they should schedule this. Our second ever client was a marketing agency that like has also doubled in the last 2 years in headcount. Third client sold to Plaid, which is a massive fintech company. And so we just chose our client profile pretty well. And you could do that as a business owner, right? Like you could choose who you want to work with and who you want to sell into. So I think choosing that clientele intentionally, something that we did well. I did it well with my marketing consulting firm in my late teens, early 20s. Like my first ever client was a #1 New York Times bestselling author. And it doesn't matter what he paid me. It doesn't matter what I did. Just, I was able to go in, do work, get a case study and build from there. And so I would definitely recommend that for other business owners. And just because you are a year into your business or 2 years into your business doesn't mean you can't do the same thing, but maybe with a different product or a different offering or packaging your product in a different way. And so we've been able to grow with our clients. Right now, I would say 10 people or more is where it makes sense to start planning an offsite. We do have some office first clients, but a vast majority of our clients are remote first or they're hybrid. And they're already feeling the pain points associated with not doing offsites. If they aren't, it's hard to build trust. It's hard to build camaraderie. It's hard to do strategic planning. It's hard to solve pressing problems. You might lose top talent if you don't keep them engaged because they can just open up another tab on their computer. And if companies, those are for the companies that aren't planning offsites regularly or at all. For the ones that have planned offsites, they're probably already sold on the importance of planning offsites, but then they've done it themselves, and like their chief of staff, executive assistant, head of people just spent 50, 100 or more hours while doing all these other jobs and just hated their lives. And so the pain's really high for us to go and sort of take that stress away. Or they just see that we've done it hundreds of times, and at most they're going to do it 4 times a year, 10 times a year for larger companies at a department level. So we're just getting better at it, like ChatGPT, and we're the AI for offsites, if you want a quotable.
Yeah,
so
I love it. You mentioned being intentional about who you're going after with prospects. I'm curious kind of where your best leads come from and how you've cultivated those. Has that been through referrals? Has that been through, I know you're pretty active yourself on LinkedIn, is that through company social channels? Where do you feel like you're kind of best sourcing your leads?
Yeah, about 60% of our business is outbound, actually. I think that's also part of choosing an ideal client profile is for us, we were able to identify what titles people are going to have. There are negatives to targeting like venture-backed startups, but one of the benefits are we can see when if they raise the Series A or like that's public info in most cases, and we can see if they're remote or hybrid because we can just go to their company profiles on LinkedIn and like look at their employees, and if one's in New York and one's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where you're at, Miami, then like they're probably remote. So we've just developed a easy to target client profile. And so then I started doing some outbound emails, and that started working. So we did more of them, and then we sort of ramped it up to having an outbound SDR service that we hired. And then we hired an SDR full time to sort of replace that service. And so we just experimented with a couple different marketing channels, but found one that was working and started to scale it up. Now I'm trying to do that with different marketing channels in sort of a founder-led marketing capacity. And so now I'm focusing a lot on the inbound ones, like channel partnerships, content, SEO, which is longer term. And like we bought offsite.com, which was not cheap. Wanted to do that as in part for the SEO juice. And social media, like there's a bunch of like organic options we're playing around with, but then also referrals, going into a business with a network, like a founder market fit they talk about, and having your network align with the industry you're in is important. I speak at conferences and get leads that way. So we're just playing around and trying to figure it out.
Awesome. Well, I think one thing we'll talk about maybe offline is how do you scale that on the content side, right? With social, and like you talking about how you're speaking at conferences, how do you capture that and then turn that into content that you can be using on social and helping to build the brand that way? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity for y'all there, and just kind of what I was looking at, but I'm excited for y'all for that. I'm curious as well to hear about, are there sectors or industries that you target or that you at least gained insight on? I had this idea when I was researching the company and learning a little bit more about y'all, that like, is Offsite one of those companies that can be like a leading indicator on like the health of the overall economy? Like if people are booking more offsites, is that like showing that the economy is doing well? But I'm just curious if you've got like market level knowledge, sector-based knowledge, just by kind of thinking about how people are allocating the demand and budget towards offsite needs.
I hope we get there at some point. I think offsites are still so new that it's one of those like to be determined things. I will say that in the last year, tech companies have been hit really hard by the macroeconomic circumstance, and that is our main clientele. And so we've been growing through it in part because we're new, and the amount of companies planning offsites for the first time is far greater, than the ones cutting offsites. There's definitely some pain, and so like maybe 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, like we can be the bellwether to see like are the number of offsites going down and screwed. But I think there's some macro trends here, like commercial real estate's being tormented right now, and a lot of that money is going to things like offsites or hiring remote, which then leads to planning offsites. And remote and hybrid is not going away anytime soon, despite what maybe Apple wants or Meta wants. And so Elon Musk's going to fight me on this, but hopefully I'll win. Yeah, hopefully he doesn't tweet at me. But
no, I think the workforce.
He's busy enough, but
I think the workforce is speaking pretty well. I mean, we're an agency that is built on collaboration among people. And we proved through the pandemic that we could do this remote first when we had to be, but we've now kind of settled more into a hybrid model where we would lose talent just straight up. People would quit if we said you got to be in office 5 days a week. And so now we have taken that more hybrid approach, and I don't think we're ever going back. I don't know if the advertising marketing industry is going back.
I agree. I hope that we're not just handling the logistics of offsite planning, but that our clients today and the ones in the future view us as extensions of their team when it comes to building amazing company culture, kind of what 15.5 does for their partners, where they become so invaluable, so sticky to running an effective company and sort of increasing employee engagement, alignment, retention, that you're never going to drop them. And so that's what I'm most interested in. Like I'm most interested in seeing Offsite become a connection company and becoming part of the tech stack of running a remote hybrid company. You use Ramp or Brex for your expenses, use Asana for project management, Notion for your wiki, and then you use Offsite to connect your employees. And so that's my hope. And, in the meantime, like we're planning really fun offsites. So that's the worst things in the world.
Absolutely. I do want to hear, you mentioned I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You're in New York. I spent the first part of my career in New York, and you've got a large part of your team that's based in Chattanooga. I'm curious how you found them, how that happened. I mean, obviously you're a remote first company, and so people could be anywhere, but the fact that they're in my shared backyard is interesting to me.
Yeah, we live in a relationship economy. And so our second employee, Andrew, who's our head of engineering, I met him about a decade ago through the Teal Foundation. Bunch of young people coming together a couple times a year who either dropped out of college or thought about it or didn't go. Like I never went to college myself. And so we knew each other since our teenage years and then sort of kept in touch over time. Not very closely, but sort of knew of each other. We're sort of tracking each other's careers, and then was able to convince him to join us at Offsite as employee number 2 and like the first engineer. And then he built his own, friendships and relationships in Chattanooga. And so when we had the opportunity to hire some of his very talented friends, he just coaching them left and right from,
that's amazing.
Attractive companies in Chattanooga.
So do y'all do offsites in Chattanooga?
We haven't done an offsite in Chattanooga yet, but I go to.
When you do, you hit me up.
Yeah, I go to Chattanooga
take you out.
like quarterly. And maybe that's like another nugget. Anyone listening is like, if you're a leader of a team, you're running a company, like it's on you to get on the plane, like go visit your key people. If you're not hosting an offsite, like let's get the benefits of remote and hybrid work for 95% of days. But then there's 5% of days and conversations where it has to happen in person. You need to invest in your relationships, and that lasts you through some of the more difficult moments of running a company or life in general. So yeah, we do have a nice Chattanooga team.
Love it.
We have team members in Spain and Canada and throughout the United States, Puerto Rico, and I just love my team, and we're able to hire anyone who's awesome wherever they are.
And I love that they're all in beautiful places so that you can go visit them for those 5% of days you have for your travel. Exactly. You're going to nice places.
Next offsite's in Denver.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. My last question is kind of a question we ask everyone, which is around, when you're building while flying, it's important to keep calm under pressure. You think about like a pilot's checklist that when something, goes wrong, they kind of immediately stay calm and work through. And so when your back's against the wall and you've got to make a tough decision for your business, what's that kind of internal pilot checklist for you that helps you kind of get through it?
I don't know if I have a checklist that I run through like in the moment, but I do a lot of work to prepare myself for the moment, if that makes sense. And so maybe unorthodox, but I've started doing jujitsu about 5 months ago. And like in class, I'm literally, someone's literally trying to choke me or break my arm or leg. Like you tap beforehand, but like you're in pressure. And so I'm getting a much worse experience in class, 3 times a week versus running a company. And so that's prepared me. I also run ultra marathons like once a year and purposely under train and have it be just the worst day ever, but know I'm going to finish. And so I do some crazy stuff to like build mental toughness, but something that everyone could do or may want to do is executive coach. And so I've been working with an executive coach for many years, and actually a couple of our investors are also executive coaches. So I pull them in for sessions. And I share with my team, so I don't wallow in the experience alone. I get smart people at the table to solve the problem with me, which is sort of the whole point of meeting in the minds and why offsites are so important, because you're getting everyone at the table to solve pressing problems and then scale the solutions and run better companies. So that's kind of why offsites like my life's work at the greatest scale, because this whole meeting in the minds concept of getting diverse minds at the table to like solve the problem is what happens at an offsite just for companies, so nonprofits. So yeah, I think getting a coach, bringing smart people to the table to solve the problem with you, that's something everything can do. And then if you want to take it to the next level, like, train for
yourself up.
Play jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, beat yourself up physically with ultra marathons and jiu-jitsu. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Jared. And next time you fly down to Chattanooga, we'll meet up in person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us for Building While Flying today. I hope you learned as much as we did. We'll meet you right back here next time for another flight.